everybody.
Hi.
Waving. I see some people that are going like this to make it happen. It's just amazing. I love it. Hi.
Hi.
I want to say welcome to night 2 of our 4-part series with Abra Berens. That's co-hosted by the 4 Leelanau County Libraries. I'm Laura Toohey. I'm the program coordinator at Leland Township Library. And believe it or not, we have some new faces here with us tonight. So I just want to say hi to all of you guys. Welcome. Before I turn things over to Abra, I just want to, I see in the chat that some people made the recipe last week, and it's really exciting. That's so great. Before I turn things over to Abra, I just want to talk a little bit about the format. First, Abra's going to come on, and she's going to chat with us for a few minutes, and then she's going to show us how to make risotto. And while the video is playing, if you have a question, please go ahead and please feel free to type it into the chat. And then after the video, Abra will come back and she will she'll answer your questions, answer some of your questions. And if for some reason we don't get to one of your questions tonight, or if you're making this later this week, and you're making the recipe later this week and you have a question, please feel free to email me. My email is programs@lelandtownshiplibrary.org. Okay. And I think that's all I have to say. So I'm going to say welcome to Abra. Hi.
Hey,
I am so grateful that we're doing this from home tonight because, friends, it is freezing in Leelanau County.
I think it's freezing. The entire state seems to be frozen. And
I think all the way to Chicago, it's like in the negatives everywhere. But it's just so nice to be joining you from home tonight. So.
Yeah, well, likewise. And thanks again for having me. And thanks to everyone who, was cooking the food last week and who emailed or who, had something nice or a question to ask about it too. I know we got a lot of questions about substitutions. So just a little bit of housekeeping, I was going to go over a couple of things from last week and then give you a little intro into this week. And then we'll kick it off with the video. And like Laura said, then we'll come back and do questions after that about I guess about anything, but ideally about things from this week. And so the questions that we got the most last week were mostly around substitutions, which is something that's really near and dear to my heart, because I think that a lot of the hiccups that come with cooking is feeling like you have to follow a recipe to a T. So, you can use to make in the papillotes, you could use any sort of already cooked grain. I think farro, barley, quinoa, any of those sorts of things would be great in them. And then also for the root vegetables, any sort of already cooked, like partially cooked root vegetable would work fine, something like carrots or parsnips. And I've kind of taken to, especially with something like parsnips, even just boiling them for a little bit first and then roasting them, and they seem to hold their moisture a little bit more. So something like that would be great for it. Or you could use roasted pieces of squash if you were to have, an extra squash from this week or something like that. And then the other thing too is sort of how to make it vegetarian. And I think you could do it certainly with just more of the grain or more of the veg, and then something like mushrooms. Or I've never made a papillote with tofu, but I think if it were a really well marinated tofu, I could see something like that, or tempeh. I don't have a ton of experience cooking with tempeh, so it's a little bit, I don't know, we'd need other people's input on it. And then the other question that I just saw pop up in the chat today is, what sort of pans do I use? And so I generally just use a cast iron pan. I have an old one from Lodge, and that's what I use for most things. And then I think the one that I seared the fish in is from De Beyer. It's from a restaurant supply store, but really any sort of cast iron or just heavy duty pan. You can do it in a regular stainless steel. I don't generally sear things in nonstick anymore, but you certainly could, just be careful with nonstick. I think most people sort of know now that if the coating is starting to break down, it can have some carcinogenic qualities to it. So best to kind of be sure that you're not using a metal spatula on it or forks or things like that. So those were the questions that we got last week, mostly last week, and I see some more coming in, but I'm having trouble with divided attention, so I'm going to read those and I'll answer them as we go. But so for this week, I wanted to kind of again lean into the idea of kind of a midweek easy meal, and one of the meals that I make the most often, and sometimes I even forget about it, is risotto. And it's another one of those kind of having a jar of risotto on my shelf means that then if there's nothing else that can be made, that's really quick to whip up. And I had always sort of got questioned like, oh, but risotto takes so long. And in my experience, and we'll talk through this in the video, it really takes about 20 minutes. And so it's just that all of that 20 minutes is pretty active time. But it's a nice blank slate to absorb other flavors. And so this one is bound with a squash puree. And that is something that I make a lot, kind of late fall, this time of year in the winter, when the squash that we've sort of tucked away in our pantry may or may not be holding up super well. And so I'll make it in big batches. And what I forgot to mention as we were filming the video is that puree can be used for lots of different things. So it's a nice way, say you get like a case of seconds, or if you find that it's starting to go through, you can roast a ton of squash in one go and then make the puree. And it can be, a really fine puree put through a food processor, or just, we're going to do it today, just mashed in a bowl. And then that can be a really nice base for a soup. So I think actually with the puree, the extra puree that I had from filming this, we made a Thai curry soup. So it was just a little bit of red Thai curry paste, and then the squash puree, some extra ginger and garlic, and then some coconut milk, and blended it up. And it was a super fast vegan meal. And so, you can do things like that with the squash puree. You could blend it with something like white beans and make a really creamy dip that is good for, to replace any other sort of like hummus or things like that, dipping veg in or putting it on crackers. I also really love these vegetable purees as something to bind sandwiches together. So I'm a big lover of mayonnaise on sandwiches, obviously, maybe like everybody else. But sometimes it's like, oh, I don't actually need mayonnaise. I just need something else to hold the sandwich together. And slathering of that squash puree with ham or turkey, or even just a little bit of goat cheese, and then a big pile of arugula or greens, is such a nice way to make a really filling sandwich. So there's kind of a handful of ideas out there. And Laura was asking a little bit about roughage. There are ideas for that, because pureed squash is one of the variation techniques in roughage. So you go to the squash chapter, look up the puree, and it'll have that one is just using the puree as you would mashed potatoes, which you could certainly do, but then you can turn it into a lot of other things too. So those were all of the kind of housekeeping that I had. So I think if that works for you, Laura, we'll kick it over to the video, and then I'll answer questions in the chat and come back. All right. Sounds good. All right, so yeah, risotto. This is another one of my favorite, I need to make dinner pretty quickly. I don't have a ton of planning going on. And the reason I love making risotto, I think risotto just gets sort of a bad rap for being kind of high maintenance or taking a really long time. In my experience, it really only takes about 20 minutes to go from start to finish with a risotto. But it's all active time. So a lot of times you can, something like a slow cooker, pork shoulder, whatever, that might take 24 hours to make, but it's all inactive time because it's just resting or slow roasting or whatever. And this is the opposite of that, but it's still really only about 20 minutes, and it can absorb, sort of like we were talking about, any kind of blank flavor will absorb other flavors to it. So, this, we're gonna make tonight a squash risotto that has some orange and paprika chili flake oil and a little bit of chocolate over the top. But it could just as easily go with beets or parsnips, or just the rice itself with a big salad on top, or, Swiss chard folded in through it and next to, with some anchovy in the base, or you could put bacon in the base and some onions and things like that. it's really a neutral palette that is taking on whatever you have. So it's another good time if you have risotto rice on your shelf, you can always come home, look through your fridge, see what you have, and then add flavors into it. So we just happen to have this squash available, and so we're gonna make a squash one. And then I'm a big lover of condiments. I think that, it's been more than one occasion where I've come home and just boiled some pasta, stirred some of this paprika chili oil over the top and dotted it with ricotta. And, if there's breadcrumbs or chopped pecans or something like that. And then that's a meal, and that's really fast, and it's everything that you already have on hand. So having that stronger pantry can really lead to very quick impromptu meals. And for me, that's not only the primary ingredients like risotto rice, chickpea flour, grains, things like that, but also all of these condiments. So this one, the other nice thing about these chili oils and spice oils is that they last forever because there's nothing perishable in them. And so the way that we're going to make it is take a small pan, and you could use a frying pan. I'm going to do this in a double-sized batch because I'll use it for the next couple of weeks. So we're going to pop just a splash of oil really into the pan. Turn it on to like a medium high heat. What we're going to do is toast the spices in a little bit of the oil so that they bloom their flavor. And what that is, very similar to cooking anything, it heightens the flavor and the aromatics of it. And so that's what all toasting is, or blooming is another word that's used for it. We've got chili flakes, and this is some paprika. Paprika can come both smoked or unsmoked, spicy or sweet. Any of them work. This is a not spicy smoked paprika. But again, you could use pretty much anything that you've got on hand for it. You could add some cumin to it. You could add coriander if you want. I've done a similar thing with lemon, all those sorts of things. So now what we're looking for is just that oil is moving freely in the pan. You can kind of see like that how fast it moves through the pan. And that just shows you that it's hot, but it's not crazy hot. So I will turn it down pretty low, pop in the paprika, and pop in the chili flakes. I'm sure that there are specific amounts in the recipe that I wrote and sent you, but it doesn't have to be anything perfect. Just swirling it around until you can immediately smell it. You can see it starting to smoke a little bit. I'm gonna go ahead and turn the burner off and then add in the rest of the oil to it. And what that's gonna do is just immediately stop it from cooking so that you don't burn those spices. And you could certainly do it where you would heat all of the oil up and then add the spices to it. I find that my friend Nick always says there's no such thing as multitasking, only divided attention, and often my attention is divided. So when I've done it that way, where I heat up all of the oil and add the spices, the oil is usually too hot. It usually burns the spices. So this for me is a foolproof way of doing it, where you're using the oil itself that you're going to steep it to drop that temperature down to just a warm, and then it's going to steep in that oil for a little bit. So now you can kind of see it's got a nice spiced oil there for it. So we're just gonna set this aside. So we're gonna make a squash puree to go into the risotto, because I find that to be an easier way to incorporate the squash flavor. Plus, I have a tendency to absorb or inherit a lot of squash that are seconds or damaged. And so you can talk to your vendor at a farmer's market. They might want to sell you their seconds, or you end up even just buying a squash and then realizing that it has kind of a ding in it. So this is our butternut squash. You can use any type of winter squash, kabocha, even acorn, or any of those other Pennsylvania crookneck, any of those. But what you want to look for in a squash is that it's even skinned all over. You're going to have some dings and dents, but what you're looking for is it to not have punctured the skin. And you can see here, this squash had a puncture in it, and then it has leached out that you know, that goo that squash oozes when you cut it, that's it trying to heal that wound. So it's sort of oozed over, but you can see it's got a little bit of a darker brown, and if you push on it, it's soft. That means it's not going to store as well. And that's because that skin, that protective layer has been kind of, it's a chink in its armor, and bacteria can get in, vermin could get in, whatever it is. Usually it's a bacterial issue. And so we just want to cook it up sooner rather than later. And this is another big thing about mitigating food waste, is that most grocery stores are going to throw something like this away or not sell it at all because it's got, you know, 0.01% of it is not good, but it's not going to store in someone's home. And so if we can get that, cut around that, and then salvage the rest of the squash, that means that we're able to then, you know, eat it, which is the point. So to cut a squash up, oftentimes some of the best advice I've ever been given is if you don't feel comfortable in the kitchen, change something about it. So if you're cutting, you know, kind of around something and it feels like your shoulder's in a weird spot, or you're just not comfortable, change where you are, move the item, bring Mohammed to the mountain. You can't bring the mountain to Mohammed. So just adjust it for yourself. So for me, that means I want to have as much surface area, even if it's round, on a surface where I can hold it flat. And I find the easiest thing to do is to then just cut, especially on a butternut squash, cut it where the seed capsule is going to be, that's separate from the head. So we're going to take it in one big thing. If your knife gets stuck, you know, kind of rock it back and forth. If it really gets pinched, what you can do is lift up and smash the whole thing down onto the cutting board. And then that's going to give you the extra oomph to try to crack through that squash. Just be mindful of where your fingers are, because if they're on the underside of the knife, that would be terrible. So hold it back, set it down, hold your fingers up top, and push through to get two separate pieces that now you have a flat surface. So you've gone from a rolling round surface to a flat surface. We're going to cut as close to that blemish as possible so that we can cut it away without having to lose any of it. So we've got a perfect half, and then we're just going to trim, again, turning it to the flat surface down, trim that little bit of bruised and damaged squash away. This is going to go into the compost, and then we have all of this squash that's still usable. Flip it to the other side. I like to take the stem off. You don't have to, but mostly it's so that it's easier to cut it in half like this, again, cutting on a flat surface as much as is possible. And then you've got your 4 pieces. Get rid of our compost. And then we're just going to roast it. So this is just a baking sheet that's lined with tin foil. I like to do this because it makes for very fast cleanup, as I'll show you in a second. Cut side down. I don't oil it. I don't put salt on it. I don't even scoop the seeds out anymore. Just going to throw it right into the oven this way, and it's going to cook through, and then it will release from the flesh a little bit. We'll be able to scoop the seeds out real lickety split. If you don't have a baking sheet or you don't want to use tin foil, you could use a Silpat, like silicone mat down. You could use parchment. I don't generally roast straight onto a baking sheet because it tends to really stick and be just a pain to clean. I do also have switched over to using that big cast iron pan that is right over there. Just put the squash right in that, and then you don't have to throw anything away. So it's really up to you. There's options, but the bottom line is that you want to roast the squash as a whole piece. So into our oven. All right, and then this is the squash after it's been roasted. So what you're looking for is, you can see, this is why I put the tin foil down, because you've got all of the splatters and the goo and all those things. We'll be able just to lift that straight up, and you don't even have to wash the sheet tray. To know that it's done, you're looking for that browning part of it so that it's well cooked. But most importantly, you want to poke it with a kind of prodding finger, and it should dent like that. And then the same is true. Oftentimes I like to roast if I'm doing a bunch of them, the parts that have the seeds in them separately, because they're going to cook faster, because where the seeds are, that's open, and so it's not as dense in between. So this is nothing but squash flesh. And so it's going to take longer for the heat to penetrate that all the way through, whereas with the seed, you can see it has an open cavity, so this will take less time. But also, you can't really overcook it because we're cooking it until it's into oblivion anyway, so you can just let it all go as well. And then to make the puree, what we'll do is grab a trusty metal bowl, take a spoon, and you're just scooping the flesh away from the skin. On some skin, like if you were to use delicata or acorn or something like that, that skin is more tender and more palatable, so you don't even have to worry about including the skin. Maybe then I would just make a plain risotto and serve the like roasted wedges of squash on the side or something like that. So that's one. And we're just trying to get as close to the skin as possible so that we're not leaving any behind, but without getting any of that really tough texture along with it. And sometimes it breaks apart in your hand. This is another thing that's good for if you've got kids and you want to include them in the kitchen. Since they can't really go wrong with it and they like getting their hands dirty, they can do it either with a spoon or just with their hands to scoop everything out. And it's also good, we're gonna mash it in a second, and seeing as how I'm an adult, I'm going to use a spoon, but kids could use their hands and really, you know, get dirty with it. So, and you can see how easy it is to scoop the seeds out after it's cooked. And so I don't even bother taking the seeds out when it's raw. Plus then they're already cooked. So if you want to roast them to eat them as a snack, they're already roasted for you. Then I would just take them away from the flesh, maybe re-crisp them in the oven, and then toss them a little bit of olive oil, salt. You could put some paprika on that, or everything spices, you know, lots of different options. All right, so that's our squash puree. Just fold it all up. That's going to go into the compost eventually. And this pan is done. And then what we'll do is just add, I like to always add a little bit of extra fat. I've never had too much fat in my food. Generally, pinch of salt, because everything's better with a little bit of salt. And then you're just taking the squash and kind of mashing it up. And that's when you can see if you've got any bits of the skin, you can do that. If you want to have a silky smooth puree, you could get a food processor out. If this is a like fast Monday night dinner, there's no way I can be bothered to pull my food processor out. And so just mashing it with a spoon is going to be just fine. Just like that. And this is one of those times where it's better to overcook the squash than under. If it's undercooked, it's going to give you a real pain to mash up because you're just going to have hard pieces, things like that. So really let it go until it doesn't resist when you poke it with your finger, and when you got that nice sort of browning and caramelization, it's going to add depth to the flavor as well. So that is our squash puree, and we're going to set that aside. And now we're going to start on making the risotto. So the trick to, you know, I hate the word trick actually. It's not a trick, it's a technique. The thing about risotto, we've got risotto rice, which is this rice here. And this is a short grain rice. It's got a lot of starch in it. And that starch, you can see it even already coating my fingers there, is what is going to give it the sort of creamy texture of the risotto. So a lot of times people think you have to add a bunch of cream to risotto, but there's enough starch in the grains themselves that you shouldn't need to add any additional fat or dairy unless you want it. If you want it to taste that way, then by all means add it in. as we get our rice going, the key to risotto is its constant stirring and adding a bit of liquid at a time. And so you want the rice to be able, it's that agitation from the stirring and the regular addition of the liquid that's pulling the starch from the center of the grain out and then letting it gelatinize. It's not really gelatin, but it's doing that same thing in the pot itself, which is what gives it the texture. So I've got a pot of water going right now. You want to have that come to a full boil and then maintain it at a simmer while you're adding it to it. And so we'll go through that, but it's good, to give yourself some time while you collect the other flavors that are going to go into the risotto to have that pot going so that you don't have to wait for it. Until that time, then we're going to actually make the risotto in a pan, and kind of an open pan like this. You could add something like bacon or, like I said, anchovy, onions, garlic, things like that. I'm going to keep this pretty plain because we're going to add the stronger flavors of the paprika, the chili flake, the orange, and the chocolate. That's a lot going on already, so we don't need to add garlic and onion and things like that, but you certainly could, especially if you were making a plainer risotto, which is what I seem to often make more in the spring, like something like a Swiss chard risotto. I would definitely add those flavors to the base of it. If you were using something like onions or garlic, you would add them at the beginning, let them sweat and get nice and mellow and warmed and everything before you add the rice, and then they're going to be a part of the pan as you cook through. So right now in our frying pan, we've got just a little bit of olive oil that's warming up, just drying off this measuring cup. And I'm gonna make half the recipe because there's just 2 of us that live here. And so in general, for uncooked grains, about a half a cup per person for risotto is gonna be enough to be a full portion. If you were doing something like regular boiled rice or wheat berries or buckwheat or something like that on the side, I would say a 1/4 cup is a good per person portion. Grains generally about double in size. So for me, I'm gonna wanna eat like a full cup of cooked risotto. So I'm gonna start with half a cup. But if I were having it with something else, I don't need quite as much. So that's something where the recipe is flexible. You could also just I could make the full batch, and then we would have the risotto ready to go, either to reheat for leftovers the next day or to make something like risotto salta, where you take the risotto and pan fry it and make like a crispy risotto cake, or form it into balls with some cheese in the center and deep fry those and make arancini, things like that you can do with the leftover risotto. So having leftover risotto is, not the worst thing in the world. I mean, nothing at this point is really the worst thing in the world. Huh? Great, so now I can hear that my water is up to a boil, so I'm gonna bring that over here to be sure that I have it. While that comes over, you can see my olive oil is just starting to smoke a little bit, so I'm gonna turn the heat down. It's a powerful burner. I'm gonna add my risotto rice. And very similar to what we were saying about toasting the spices, we're just gonna let the risotto toast a little bit in that hot oil. That's gonna bring out some of the nuttier flavors, gives it a chance to really absorb some of the olive oil flavor and get a little bit of browning on it. So we'll let that kind of toast up a little bit. If I were making this not for a video, I would have it on the stove and just keep the water, at a low simmer next to the pan with the risotto that I'm stirring. And then for the first addition of liquid, I like to start with either white wine, you could do red wine, but really hard cider. And we've got this delicious cider from Tandem. You can really see me. And so that's the sound that you're looking for. Every time you add the liquid in at the beginning, you want that psh and steam to happen. You want to keep things as hot and going as possible. And there's 2 reasons for that. One, if you're adding a cold liquid to this pan, it's gonna drop the temperature of everything and double the cooking time, because you're gonna have to bring the liquid back up to heat, and then you're gonna have to cook it off. So if it's a really hot pan, even though that hard cider wasn't hot, it just psh right up. So that's what you're looking for, that. And then you want it to be fully absorbed. So if I'm looking at this, all of that cider is now gone. And as you can tell, I didn't really measure it. I know I put a measurement on the recipe. You can certainly use that, or just, you know, tip a little in. Like everything with tandem hard cider, I think, or, you know, any hard cider, I think more is sometimes better. And then the nice thing is that now that we've added our water, it's the same thing. You heard that little bit of sizzle as we go, and we're just gonna stir gently until all of that water is absorbed. And so this is why I think risotto gets a bad rap for taking a long time, is that this is gonna be about 20 minutes of standing here. So the other nice thing about using a good wine or cider or something like that for the start of your risotto is that you're just standing here. So you just get a glass, pour a little bit for yourself, watching the risotto throughout. And that's it. And you're just standing and stirring for a little bit. And this is the other reason I think I like risotto so much, is that you can't do anything else. And like I was saying about divided attentions, it's really easy for me to get kind of caught up with trying to execute a bunch of things all at once while still trying to get dinner going. And this is something where you just can't. You just have to be here and let it cook through. So it's a nice moment to take a second. It's a nice time to catch up with the people that you're going to eat dinner with. If you're eating dinner with someone, you know, you can be talking about stuff, because this isn't really, you don't have to pay that much attention. You just have to stand here, and then when you see that the liquid has mostly been absorbed, as this has been now, so you can see if we pull it through the spoon, it rushes into the center, but there's not big pools of water. So we're going to add the next ladleful. But that's all you have to focus on. And so it's a nice time to catch up with someone you haven't seen all day. It's a nice time to listen to the radio. It's a nice time to just think quietly about your day. You know, we could get real self-helpy here with this risotto, but it's true. It's one of my favorite times. So just let yourself kind of go, and then keep adding it in. And we're gonna take this until it's about 90% cooked, and then add in our squash puree. And that will then be the kind of final addition of flavor to bind it all together. All right, so now looking at this risotto, you can see it's still holding its shape. We're gonna add some more liquid in a second, but the texture is different. The rice grains are starting to swell, but you can see that they're still very chalky white in the center, which means that that starch hasn't been reached yet. And so this is about halfway cooked through. So wherever you are in the process, that's about halfway. So another indication that we're starting to get along in the cooking process is if you start to notice that the bubbles are going to change as you add the liquid to it. It's going to become, it's getting thicker. The starch is really adding viscosity to those bubbles, and so they're going to be slower to pop and bigger bubbles. They have more structure that they can hold. And so that's another good sort of sign that you're starting to get on in it. Also, you can see in the rice grains themselves, they're starting to get a less stark white color and more of a kind of a creamy, softened color. So I would say that this rice at this point is about 75 to 80% there. I'm going to add another ladle full. One of my chef mentors, Sky Gingle, often said, I think I asked her, how do you know when something's done? And she said, the ingredients will tell you. And do you want to eat that? And it was like, I think it was an eggplant or something I was grilling. And it was like chalky white, just had some like char marks on it, but it didn't look inviting. And I was like, no, I don't want to eat that. And she said, yeah, that's the thing. And then we continued to grill the eggplant slices, let them stay on the heat. And they got this like warm sort of like caramely color, and the purple of the skin got deep dark purple, and they just became so luscious. And she said, now do you want to eat them? I said, yeah, now I really do want to eat them. And so that's the difference. And again, as humans, we've been assessing plants that we're eating for a really long time to know if it's something that we want to eat or not. And so there's all of these visual cues that are going to kind of tell you along the way. And so if it looks like creamy and soft and inviting, then you know that your risotto is getting close to being ready. If it looks hard and chalky and like it's going to stick in the back of your teeth, it's not ready yet. And so you can see as we go through to cook, see if I can scoop up some of these grains. That grain right there, it still has kind of a center white chalky line in the center, but it's much less than when we first started. And so we're getting on in the cooking process, and probably I would guess at this point, sort of 2 more ladlefuls of water is going to do it. Right now we're about 10 minutes into cooking this, and so if it takes us 20 minutes, this is maybe half as much, so I guess it didn't take quite as long. And so that's the thing, is you can't always rely on the time alone, because you've got a bigger pan and less rice, which is what the situation is here now, or you've got a hotter burner, or you're making it over a campfire, and like all these different things. So you're really looking to the ingredients to give you the cues that they're done cooking and that they're ready to go. More so than the time, although the times are a helpful guide for that. I also can't remember, I don't think I added any salt earlier, so we're going to add a big pinch of salt now. There is salt in our squash puree, so each element you want to have seasoned pretty well, but then also be sure that if you have over-seasoned, say the squash puree, or over-seasoned the rice, then you can add a less seasoned item to be the complement for it, and it'll kind of drop the salinity for the entire thing. So you're thinking about things as individual components, but also as a dish as a whole. All right, so that's our final addition of water that I think we're gonna need. Looking at this rice now, you can see the moisture it's got a nice thick kind of creamy sauce. It's sliding evenly in the pan. The individual grains of rice don't have any sort of hard chalky lines through the center. And then what we'll do is just give it a quick little taste to be sure, because you can't always judge something by looks. So the texture that you're looking for, this is perfect, is you want it to be individual grains, so you're still tasting each individual thing, but also that they have a little bit of texture, but they should yield to your teeth. They shouldn't get stuck in the back of your molar. They want it to just be like really, really texturally tender. It's not really a phrase, but we should make it one. So now I'm going to take some of this squash puree and just plop it in. Again, because I'm making a half batch, I'm only going to use about half of what we've got. You can always add in more as you want to, if you want it to be squashier or less squashy. Because this wasn't broken down in a food processor, it's going to take a little bit more stirring. And maybe we'll add just a splash more liquid to pull it together. And at this point, I'm going to turn the heat off of my burner because I don't want it to overcook. And so right now, I think we're just shy of that 20-minute mark for the risotto. And right true to form, it's ready to go. I'm gonna add just a little bit more squash to it right now. You can see it's got a nice like bounding of the color of the squash. But I think since we have it, we might as well make it real squashy. All right, so that's got all of our squash puree into it. We're gonna taste it again, just to be sure that the salt level is right. The sweetness of the squash, I think, could take a little bit more salt to it. A little bit back and forth. Stir that in, and then we're gonna plate it up. So to do that, I'm gonna take just a couple of bowls. If you were serving this as like a big serving platter, you know, same thing. I would just get something that's gonna be a little bit flatter so that you can drizzle the toppings evenly over the whole thing. If you get stuck with a really deep vessel, it means whoever gets the first couple of scoops is gonna get all of the toppings. That's also why I like to just go ahead and go straight into individual portions. So we're gonna take our squash and add that. And again, this is probably like a cup and a half per person. In general, if you're thinking about how much food to make, you know, we talked a little bit about the different volume per person. I also try to never serve people more than like a pound of food at a time. So if you're like having people over for a dinner party and you're making several courses, thinking about like the entire volume of food that they're gonna eat, if it's much more than a pound, it's gonna like really make people full. So I try to aim for about that. And so, you know, this is gonna be served with like a salad on the side or something like that. I would kind of lessen the amount. Or if you were serving it alongside like a seared piece of fish or, you know, pork chop or something, then you could do that and maybe just lessen it a little bit. But I like risotto to be just the main event on its entirety. So then we've got our spice oil that we made before. So we've got a nice toasty, spicy oil. We're gonna spoon that over the top. Couple spoonfuls, add some richness and some spice and some smoky flavor to it. I've got my last few cocoa nibs over the top. You could also take a square of dark chocolate and just grate it over. I like the cocoa nibs, and I've got just this last little bit in the jar, and so might as well use them up. The nice thing about risotto, because it's so warm, it really benefits from garnishes that are high on aromatics. And so, you know, the oil and the spices, the chocolate, and then we're gonna do a final little bit of grating of orange over the top. And so that's just gonna take those orange oils and really, like, you can just immediately smell it as soon as it hits the hot risotto. And that's really what's adding that flavor to it. We could add orange to the base of it, all those things, but really just that little bit of zest over the top is gonna give it a nice, mild, orangey flavor. And so you're really getting it all in the aromatics. Same would be true if you were using something like a walnut oil or hazelnut oil. If you didn't want the texture of those nuts, then you can just use the oil and drizzle it over the top. That oil, similar to how we were blooming the spices or toasting the rice, the heat from that is going to really gently lift those smells up and make the flavors much more pronounced. So that is our risotto. All right, so that's the risotto, and we had a couple of questions come up throughout. One of which was Sherry, I think, said, you know, why not add the the paprika and the chili oil to the beginning. And one is that I generally make that in larger batches, so that, because I spoon it over a lot of things, it's really good over something like guacamole, or anything that's could use a little bit of pep. I just spoon it on a lot of stuff. But then also, one of the things that I think, similar to when we were making those papillotes last week, and you open up those packets, you get that kind of like waft of steam and aromatics, which we're obviously we've known for a while, but are really seeing it now with COVID, that if you lose your sense of smell, you often lose your sense of taste. I mean, you do lose your sense of taste. It's about 90%, I think, was what somebody equated it to. So the risotto it's so warm, and it'll hold its heat for so long, that anything that's really high on aromatics, if you hit it just at the end, you really get that lift of flavor, or of smell. And so it enhances the flavor. So you can control it a little bit more. If you have someone, I forget, Linda, I think, said she is not a fan of chili flakes, then you also not everybody has to get it in their bowls. So that's one way too. And I like the cocoa nibs because they add a little bit of texture to it too, and they're more widely available now than they used to be. But also, just taking a square of dark chocolate and just grating it over the top, you won't get the same like textural crunch of the cocoa nibs, but it'll kind of melt and give you those aromatics. And so it's really more of a scent than it is a flavor, but you get that flavor too. And then the same for the orange, that you could add a bunch of orange juice to the risotto at the beginning, but it tends to get that kind of cooked orange flavor. And this is just the zest. So then you get just the smell of it over the top of it. Somebody else also asked about the two different types of risotto rice. There's arborio and carnaroli, which is a word I have trouble saying, but you could use either one. They're very short grain rice that have a higher starch content, and so it's sort of the opposite line of what you're looking for in most rice dishes, where you want those kind of individual grains really light and fluffy, and you're going to rinse away all of the starch before you cook it. You're looking for the opposite thing. So you really want that starch, and then the shorter grain tends to release it in that way. So there are two different species of rice. There's I'm blanking on it right now because we're live, but I'll look it up at some point. But yeah, it's just an interesting little breakdown of rice. And then let's see, it said, how much oil did you add for the squash puree? We didn't use any oil in the squash puree. So it's fully like a no fat puree. So you're just taking the squash and cutting it in half. And some people have asked about this too, that, the skin really protects the flesh from burning too much, and it kind of helps it steam a little bit by putting it on the skin side up. You're going to have a little bit of steam generated underneath. And so then you're just pulling that away. So if that gets really deep, dark brown, or even burned a little bit, as someone who has burned a fair amount of squash in her oven, you can usually just kind of scrape that away. And so it's not as big of a deal for that. And then you pull it out, and you could add some oil to it when you mix it, just to make it easier to move. I think the squash puree in roughage has some cream in it, but you could go either way. And I think if I were adding oil to the bowl of the squash puree, probably just like a couple of glugs, which is probably like, a couple tablespoons to a quarter cup or so, just enough to kind of get it to bind up a little bit, and then a pinch of salt. And then Rose was asking about sushi rice, and I have never tried making risotto with sushi rice. I don't immediately see why it wouldn't work. I think it has less starch, and I don't know if the agitation would release it in the same way, but certainly if I had really planned on having risotto and only had sushi rice, I would give it a shot. And I mean, something will happen and it'll still be tasty. And that's a good point too, that in a restaurant scenario, there's the way that we would do it in a restaurant is that we would cook the rice to 80% done, and then we would heat it up with either fresh water or chicken stock. And to make it that sort of really ethereally light risotto, we would have whipped cream, unsweetened whipped cream on the line, as well as some butter. And we would just go back and forth with butter and whipped cream. And then that is how you would get that texture, and the whipped cream kind of lightens it. So you could certainly do that. I don't generally do that at home because I don't know, it's something that seems to make it sort of unduly rich for a middle of the week meal, but that isn't a really, I mean, I sort of put this one on for Valentine's Day week, so there's a little bit of chocolate in it. So if you want to make it like extra luscious, I would just add some whipped cream to it too, and you'll kind of go back and forth, and it doesn't take very much. So if you had a rice that was really sticking together, like the sushi rice, then you could, in theory, loosen it with some whipped cream or just a little bit more water right before serving it. But again, I've never tried it, so I don't really know for sure. And then Katie Weber is asking about other favorite flavor combinations. You know, for me, it's really kind of whatever is in the fridge. I think something like any of the greens, like kale or Swiss chard, even collard greens are really nice. And what I would do is I would then, if I wanted to put bacon or something in, or onions and garlic, I would make that base of aromatics at the beginning before you toast the rice, and then add the rice in, let that toast, and then you just carry on the same way. And then when the rice is probably like 90% done, like I think in the video I said, okay, we're gonna add probably about 2 more ladles, you'll start to recognize what that looks like in the pan. That's when I would add in the already cut up greens. So I would just roll up the leaves, cut them into ribbons, and then fold them in. And the heat from the risotto will just soften them without really cooking them too much. Spinach is great for that too. In the springtime, I really love a pea risotto. And so you could either make a pea puree like we did with the squash, or just throw a bunch of frozen peas in with it, or fresh peas in with it. And then again, the heat of the risotto will kind of lightly cook it. That's really nice. I mean, mint is a pretty classic thing with peas. So a little, instead of the orange, I might use a little bit of lemon zest, and then a little bit of mint over the top, or parsley or something like that. In the wintertime, I also really love a parsnip puree, and you can make a parsnip puree sort of the same way with the squash, although I usually boil that, or just cook the raw parsnips either with water, with cream, and a little bit of butter, and then whiz that up. They won't mash as easily as the squash does, so you would need to do the food processor, or I guess get really good at bashing it in the bowl. But and all of those purees they freeze and are super useful. So I think it's one of those things, batch cooking is always a little bit of a trick, because you can make a ton of something, and then you have to, like, if you make like a gallon of lentil soup on Sunday, then you're eating lentil soup like every day, and that can get old. But if you just cook a bunch of lentils, then you have lentils and you can use them in different things. Lentils would be great in that papillote. The squash and any of those vegetable purees, you could make them in large batches and then freeze them in 2-pint containers. And I really love using deli containers in the freezer. And I know Hanson's, maybe they don't want to know this, but Hanson's has sold me some before. So if you pop over there and just ask the deli counter if they would sell you a sleeve, they might do it. Or Gordon Food Service, somebody was asking about the butane burner. That's where I got that. And you can buy just a sleeve of those deli containers, and they freeze well. They go through the dishwasher. They're super useful. So you could make a bunch of those purees and then just freeze them and then thaw them. If you're thinking on your way out the door in the morning, what am I going to make for dinner? You could pull one of those purees and then make it with that. So, let's see, what else? Chicken stock or veggie stock in it. You can use either one. In restaurants, we often use chicken stock to make the risotto. Now that I often am cooking for folks who are leaning more vegetarian or vegan, and so I don't tend to use it anymore. And I really like how it tastes with just the water. You're really tasting the rice. You could certainly use a veggie stock, but I tend to really like just putting all of the aromatics into it too. And I haven't really found a veggie stock way of making it that the flavors always taste kind of muddy to me. And I'm sure it's just like it's usually because I like save the scraps, and then put them in the freezer and then make veggie stock. And it's such a random collection that I don't love it. But you certainly could. And when I said using red wine, somebody had mentioned about the beets leaving a kind of unpleasant color in the papillote. A red wine risotto will be very purple. And so if you're going to use red wine, just know that you're going to get a different color from it in that way. And then somebody else was asking about neutral oil, and neutral oil is a flavorless oil. So I kind of think of oils in basically through two different categories. There's sort of flavored oils, and I don't mean like, there's lemon or something in it or tarragon in it, but just that it has a flavor to it, something like olive oil or a nut oil. Any of those that you're really looking for the flavor of those ingredients. And then a neutral oil is something where it's going to have any of those things that would add flavor to it taken out. So something like, canola oil, soy oil, any sort of vegetable oil. I tend to use either rice bran or grapeseed because they're more available. They have a really high smoke point, and then they're also not grown as a monoculture here. And so it provides a market incentive for farmers to grow things besides corn and soy. It's a little bit of a niche reason to seek it out. But I do think that those things are valuable. And I think Hansen's, last time I was there, did have some of the grapeseed. It's with the other oils, and it has like a blue label to it, I think. And it's not more expensive particularly. There's some conversation in the comments about paella versus risotto. And I was taught to make paella. It's a similarly a short grained rice. It has a lower starch. It's bomba rice. Has less starch in it than risotto. And I was always taught to not stir risotto, or I'm sorry, paella. We just spent an hour talking about stirring risotto. Paella, I don't stir, and risotto I do. So paella is relying on that steaming in the shallower pan, so that's what's cooking it, and that's how you get those individual grains. But it is still kind of that one pot. And it looks like Act Uganda is talking about all of the different things that you can add to it. And certainly don't be afraid to let that bottom, the sokrat is the bottom kind of burnt rice of paella, or Samin Nosrat has a really wonderful video about making tadig, which is the Persian rice dish where you have that crust and you flip it out, and that crust is the like sought after bit. So those are all, I think rice it's such a huge part of so many cultures' diets. Rose Hollander actually said to me once at a cooking class that I got to attend that she did, that across different parts of Asia, a pretty normal greeting translates to "Have you eaten rice today?" And so it's in so many of these cultures, and it's neat to see how different cultures use it in different ways, and the different ways that it's grown, and the different varieties that yield different things. So it's kind of a nice little deep dive into an ingredient that maybe we don't always think so much about. At least I don't think so much about. So. I think those are all the questions, and I think I'm going to kick it back to Laura. But I was wondering if Jenna Erb is still on. Last week, she froze the papillotes, and I was wondering if Jenna cooked it. So I don't know if we can find Jenna. I'll try to find her and ask her to unmute if she's still here. Maybe she hasn't.
I love Samin Nosrat, you guys. I don't know if any of you got to listen to her podcast, Home Cooking, but it was just this like bit of sunshine.
Jenna is still here.
It's really wonderful. Is Jenna here? I heard someone say something.
She needs to unmute herself. Unmute herself.
I'll find her and ask her.
Okay. So I think Samin's wonderful. Thanks for plugging Samin. We have our cookbook at Leland Township Library too. I also think we should rename this recipe Self-Help Risotto. I just thought that was I love that. Just like kind of think your thoughts, you guys.
Yeah.
One thing, some folks have been reaching out to ask me about Abra's book, Roughage. And I called around to a couple of the bookstores, and it is available. Brilliant Books has it. Cottage Bookshop in Glen Arbor has it, and Leelanau Books has it, and they're also willing to order it for you and send it to you wherever you are. So just call
Ray.
You can order it. Okay. Okay, Jenna said she hasn't cooked it yet.
Yep. So we'll all wait anxiously.
We're waiting to hear. But I loved the chat tonight. I loved the cheers. I wish you could push a little like heart. You know how you can do like a heart emoji? I wanted a heart emoji button for the chat tonight, so I could like heart and love.
Yeah.
Thank you guys all for joining us tonight. This was really, really wonderful. Heart, heart, heart. Yes, Sherry. Yes, that's how I feel too. We will see you back here next Monday. Again, if you have a question for Abra as you're making this week, feel free to send me an email, programs@leylandtownship.library.org, and you will hear from me Friday with a reminder email. And this is wonderful. Thank you guys so much.
Hey, wait, is Leslie Saffel there? Nobody answered my question. Jim was having risotto tonight.
Oh no, you're breaking up.
Oh. I'll call him.
Email me the question. Email me the question, okay?
Okay.
Nonsense.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
All right, we'll see you guys all next week.
Bye,
Thanks.
Kate.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Bye,
coming.
Donna. Bye, Alan.
Yes.
Bye, Shirley. You made it. I'm so glad.
No, she made a comment or something. Yeah.
Yummy.
Hi,
I can't
Cora.
wait to make, can't
Thanks.
wait to make this.
We didn't get your question. Please email me, okay? It was so nice. So many of you had your videos on. We got to see your faces. We saw you laughing. Isn't Abra so funny? It was so nice to see you guys. Thank you for joining us.
Somebody sent,
Looking
it
forward to
sounds
next
like,
Monday.
good night, Bob. Good night.
Bye,
Carol.
everybody.
Hello to my sister in Texas.
Isn't that neat? You can see your people through Zoom.